Good afternoon, everyone. This is Karen Billowith, the president of Idaho Community Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today for our virtual Pacific Northwest Resilient Landscapes Initiative session. We're still having people sign on. We actually had almost 60 people registered for this event, so we're really excited to have people from throughout the state participate. However, because of the number of people, we will ask you all to keep your microphones muted while we go through the presentations. We do want to encourage questions, however, so there are now instructions up on your screen about using the chat window to submit questions either to myself or other speakers, and we'll also have plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'm just gonna pause for a minute so you can orient yourself to your screen. I know we have at least one person on the phone, and we'll try to track people on the phone as well. You can use the icons to raise your hand, or you can physically wave, and we'll try and see if we can see you. Although with this many people, we can't see everybody at the same time. So truly the chat is the best option for questions. So I will go ahead and get started, and hopefully as others join in, they can catch up, but I want to keep to our time frame. So again, my name is Karen Billowith. I'm the president of the Idaho Community Foundation, and I'm really pleased to be here today to facilitate this conversation. I also want to recognize Carol Walker and Chris Common from our team, who are also on this are participating and are helping lead this initiative along with many of our other team members here at Idaho Community Foundation. So as I said, today's event is focused on the Pacific Northwest Resilient Landscapes Initiative, and I truly wish we could be doing this in person, as we were able to do in February in Sun Valley, and some of you were there as well. I do believe that's the last time at least many of our staff were in person at a meeting, and it was a wonderful event, and we'll hope to capture some of that magic today. But as you know, many of us are not traveling too much right now, and our staff has actually been working remotely since early March. I do hope all of you are doing well and managing during this continued uncertainty around COVID-19, and also the increasing polarization across our communities related to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. To be quite candid, at ICF, nearly all of our staff and organizational resources over the past few months have been focused on facilitating the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund for Idaho in partnership with the United Ways of Idaho, the Idaho Nonprofit Center, and with support from many funding partners and individuals across the region. As we near month 6 for the COVID Fund, we realize that we're still in the midst of changing circumstances and learning more about how to respond to the pandemic. I mention all of this not only because it has taken up so much space in all of our lives, but also because our work with the COVID Fund underscores the importance of building resilient communities that are able to respond to and overcome social, environmental, and economic disruptions, including unanticipated crises like COVID-19. As you'll hear from our other speakers today, and many of you can articulate better than me, there's a strong link between resilient communities that are responsive and can recover from economic, social, and health crises, and to climate resiliency. And we should be looking at these in tandem, not as separate crises to be managed. Our work with the COVID Fund also demonstrated that vulnerable populations across the state are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. This has reaffirmed our commitment to ensure that our work promotes equitable outcomes for all, regardless of geography, socioeconomics, race, or culture. And to that point, I want to acknowledge that Idaho is the traditional land of 5 recognized tribes who have stewarded the land for generations. We respect and deeply appreciate this attention to the land and hope that we can further this by permanently protecting climate resilient lands throughout our state. One of the reasons ICF has been so excited to participate in this initiative is because it allows us to do what we do best: match people with charitable interest with great programs and organizations. In this case, we're helping to raise awareness among our broad network about the impact of a changing climate on the places that we love, and highlight the opportunity to secure our quality of life directly in alignment with ICF's mission. We're thrilled to partner in this with the Seattle Foundation, the Oregon Community Foundation, the Land Trust Alliance, and importantly, land trusts throughout Idaho, which are ideally suited to link conservation priorities driven by climate science with the needs and aspirations of local communities. And why is it important to think beyond Idaho state lines? You'll hear from others today about why this regional approach is critical. What we are doing now with this initiative is really presenting a portfolio of opportunities for people to invest in protecting land across Idaho. We know that there's a limited opportunity to secure climate resilient lands in the Pacific Northwest, and that will help plant, animal, and human communities adapt to our changing climate. We'll talk a little bit about two of these opportunities today, and if you're interested in learning more, we'll do some follow-up. But in a nutshell, we have worked with our partner, Community Foundation and Land Trust, to identify a portfolio of projects across our region that we believe will make impactful investment on protecting our climate resilient lands. And as I said, you'll hear about two of those today. So this is a perfect time for our donors and others who have not previously supported land conservation to be able to make a permanent difference. We'll talk more about that as we go through the program. And again, I welcome your questions. But really, you want to hear from the experts today and not just from me. So to hear more about the initiative and its connection to climate science, I'm really excited to have with us Robin Miller from the Nature Conservancy, who does a really fantastic job of pulling these two things together. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Karen. Well, the experts must be coming later. I still consider myself a learner and a practitioner and learning lessons every day. So, but thank you for the opportunity to share my excitement about this initiative with all of you. I'm going to start by telling you a short story. So I was 10 years old when I first heard the sound of silence. It was on Ishberg Pass. I was on a 6-day backpacking trip up in the high Sierras of California. And Eddie Lindros, the leader of that trip as a middle school math teacher, asked me one time just to stop and pause and listen to nothing. And after the trip had ended, the blisters healed, I forgot the disgusting dehydrated meals we had eaten. That moment stuck with me, and it was really the foundation and kind of beginning of my career towards and my passion for conservation and seeing nature as a solace and a place for quiet. I have been in Idaho for over 20 years, and I would say my understanding of conservation has evolved quite a bit. And while I still seek those wild places and high peaks for enjoyment and solace, I recognize now that it's really the less obvious places, that it's our lower elevation lands and waters, the often privately owned lands and waters that connect all of these landscapes that are really in most need of conservation. And so that brings me to this initiative and why it's so important. In the Pacific Northwest, this place is the foundation of our identity. These landscapes are the basis for our farming, our ranching, our forestry, our fishing. There are places for our families to gather in normal times, to picnic, to play, to hike, to ski, to paddle, to hunt. They give us our fresh air and our fresh, clean water. So it's really this love of place that unites us in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll speak specifically to Idaho, my home here. But it is also really important for us to recognize that our lands and waters are changing, and the changing climate is exerting unprecedented pressures on our lands, waters, and our communities and our ability for maintaining our ways of life. So with that, I will introduce the Pacific Northwest Resilient Landscapes Initiative, and it's through a generous grant with the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation that the Land Trust Alliance has been able to partner with the Idaho Community Foundation, the Oregon Community Foundation, the Seattle Foundation, Idaho Coalition of Land Trusts, and all of the land trusts in Idaho and across the Pacific Northwest to put this in place. And it really addresses these issues through two primary primary paths, 2 programs, and they're both incredibly important. One is around building strong and resilient land trusts. That we need to build the capacity of our local land trust is essential, that we need these strong, enduring professional organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest, and this is especially important in Idaho, where there is a little bit less funding for conservation typically. We also, the other program that this initiative focuses on is protecting resilient landscapes, and I'll talk a little bit about how we identify those. But really it delivers grant funding directly to land trusts to protect and permanently conserve the most climate resilient lands and waters in our communities. And that's really essential and needed funding for these projects. So we're going to hear a little bit later from Katie and Ryan to give us examples of how each of those touches the ground here in Idaho. So the initiative is really, it's really special and it's really unique. And I refer to it as kind of the secret sauce. And there's 2 main ingredients that really set this initiative apart. And that is the science that it's founded on and that it uses to deliver its programs, as well as the partnerships. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about each. So what does it mean when we say resilient landscapes? And I'm going to refer to my notes because I am not a scientist. I play one on TV, I like to say occasionally. But the methodology was developed by the Nature Conservancy. It's, in essence, it is known as resilient and connected landscapes, and it's used to identify which landscapes are the most climate resilient. And it does that using 3 primary factors, and these are a mouthful, but I'm going to get through them here. So topoclimate diversity basically is the degree to which an area has diverse landscape characteristics, such as slope, elevation, and soil types. It's really kind of the stage, if you think about it, for diversity. Then there's landscape permeability, which is the degree to which a local area is connected to other natural lands without interruption by developed areas. And then there's regional connectivity, which is the potential for species to move long distances or shift their range as the climate changes. So all of this together basically says we are able to, through science, identify sites, lands and water specifically, that have both complex topography and connection to other natural areas that make them most likely to be resilient in the face of a changing climate in the future generations. So by securing these lands, it really does ensure that we have lasting and tangible outcomes for both nature and people moving forward. The second ingredient I mentioned of the secret sauce are the partnerships, and this is where this is really unprecedented, where you have these state and community foundations. We have our state organizations of our land trust and individual local, regional, and national land trusts all coming together with Doris Duke Charitable Foundation to really put this initiative on the ground. So like I mentioned, Katie and Ryan are going to talk a bit about what this actually looks like when it hits the ground. We're excited to hear from them. But in conclusion, I'll just say that while I still seek distant lands and places for silence, I understand now that conservation is about much more than protecting those high elevation sites. And conservation does need to happen closer to home, and it needs to adapt as our world does and as our world changes. So grizzly bears can still wander through the Selkirks, wolverines can still roam through the cabinets, and foresters can still run viable operations to support their families. And this is the most important conservation work that we need to be doing. And we're only going to do it by supporting each other and working together. So with that, I will pass it maybe back to you, Karen, and you can introduce our next speaker. Be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robin, for that really wonderful introduction. And our next speaker is Katie Eglin-Cox, who's the Executive Director of the Kinixu Land Trust. And she actually will be coming to us today on a pre-recorded video. So I'm going to ask Alicia on our team to cue that up.
Good afternoon and welcome to Pine Street Woods. I'm Katie Cox, the Executive Director of Kinixu Land Trust. Happy to be with you this afternoon. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about Kinixu Land Trust, our work, and where we're going. Kinixu Land Trust works across our region, reaches all the way up to the Canadian border in Boundary County, all the way to the east, Sanders County, Montana, and here in Bonner County as well, a bulk of our community conservation work happens here in Sandpoint because it is the population center of this region, and it was a great place to begin this work. In 2002, Connexie Land Trust was established upon work with the Avista Corporation and the Clark Fork Settlement Agreement, working on the streams and tributaries in the Clark Fork watershed. Our work along these streams and tributaries was about protecting bull trout habitat. Since that time, the work at Connexie Land Trust has evolved greatly. We looked at the idea of building stewards of our lands, and we needed to, in order to do that, we needed to bring together our community and get them onto the land in order for them to really understand the importance of protecting this special place. And so over 5 years ago, we looked at community conservation and the work of community conservation and how that could change the way people thought of Connexie Land Trust. We have dived deeply into the work of community conservation, being very forward-thinking and really a leader in the conservation world in this area. We have grown programs in education, both in school and summer programs through Camp Connexie, that have allowed us to bring children out to Pine Street Woods, out to their playgrounds and the nature that is all around us, bringing a deep sense of the outdoors to our students in their daily lives. We have looked at the impact we could have with our community in terms of health and recreation. And out of that grew this idea of creating a place that was close in and allowed people quick and immediate access to the outdoors. Just over 10 years ago, we found this special property. The property was close into Sandpoint, about 2.5 miles from the heart of our downtown. It was 180 acres. And we thought if we could purchase this property and bring this into the everyday lives of our community, then we could not only combat community issues like health, obesity, but also that the ever-present and pressuring challenges that we have with technology, especially in our youth. We wanted to tie our community to this place, to the nature that surrounds us here in Sandpoint. And in 2019, with the help of our entire community, along with a handful of critical funders, we were able to purchase this property and open it to the public. Pine Street Woods has become a beloved place to play and get outside for not only residents of Sandpoint, but many people that travel here. Pine Street Woods has allowed us to really break down the barriers to access that we were finding we had in Sandpoint in particular. One thing that we found was a lot of our trails and a lot of access to nature began with a very steep uphill walk. That didn't allow people of all abilities to get outside and enjoy time in nature. And so we really looked at having a piece of property that would allow us to have gentle trails, wide trails and narrow trails, in order for everybody to be able to get outside and enjoy nature. One of the reasons we jumped into the work of community conservation was because the work we were doing up to that time really served a small segment of our population. And we really felt, in looking at what the needs were of our community, that community conservation could help Connexie Land Trust serve a greater number of our population. And so with that, Pine Street Woods and the work in community conservation really allowed us to elevate the awareness of Connexie Land Trust, which has brought to us more recognition, as well as more people coming to us in search of a place to do that foundational work of conservation protection. Land protection has been very much our foundational work, and up to this time has been opportunistic in nature. What we are seeking and trying to do with the help of the Land Trust Alliance, the Idaho Community Foundation, and the Doris Duke Foundation is really to increase the ability for us to be very strategic in how we go about conservation. This funding will allow us capacity within our organization to be able to use our staff time and our resources much more wisely. Now, with this technical assistance grant that Conixu Land Trust received, we are able to look at the land and the landscape much differently. This grant has allowed us to work in collaboration with partners at the Heart of the Rockies, where they have staff that have allowed us to sit with them and develop tools that will give us a conservation map that's much more strategic in nature. Without this strategic conservation plan, we would not be able to really focus our work where we will have the greatest impact, which is of vital importance as we begin as a region to see exponential growth. This aspect of growth has led to a sense of urgency and also makes this work in forming a strategic conservation plan even more timely and essential. We look forward at Conixu Land Trust to really moving our projects, our land conservation projects, in a very focused, strategic manner to have the biggest impact on this region as we can have. We know that you cannot have resilient communities if you do not have resilient land. The spectacular nature that exists all around us here in this region needs to be preserved. People will move here and continue to move here because of what is here. If we don't think thoughtfully about how to keep special pieces and special experiences that we have now, this place could look very different in 100 years. This really is the critical time to be doing this work and to be looking at this region with a different set of eyes. It's the right time to look at this as a community, but it's the best time to look at this as an organization. We're grateful for the support that we've received, and we're grateful for this vision, because with this vision, we will protect and save what we all enjoy on a daily basis living here. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I look forward to engaging in more conversations. I invite you to follow up with me. Give me a call. Let's talk about the work we do at Conixu Land Trust, where we're going, and how you can help.
So I hope you all enjoyed that. That was an amazing video, very warm introduction from Katie, but also those photos. Wow. I think it makes us all understand why we're happy to live here in Idaho. The other thing I think Katie did such a great job of highlighting is the importance of the capacity building grants that are part of this initiative, because they're helping our land trusts throughout Idaho that may not quite be ready to engage in a land conservation grant through this initiative, but need some additional support to get to the next level. And they've shown us at Conixu that this can and is very important to their success. So that is a really wonderful story that she told in a beautiful setting. Now I'm really pleased to introduce Ryan Ludy, who's the Executive Director of Vital Ground, and he's going to talk about one of the projects that was selected as part of the portfolio for land conservation grants.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. I wished I would have brought someone in to play violin music in the background. I think it would have made for a lot smoother transition here, but that was a wonderful video. So as Karen mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Vital Ground Foundation, which is a Missoula, Montana-based land trust that focuses its efforts on conserving habitat for grizzly bears and preventing conflicts between bears and people. We're super excited to be participating in the Resilient Landscapes Initiative because it really highlights how our wildlife-centric work integrates with these other large, huge landscape scale issues that are facing conservation today. Things like, obviously, climate change, but also the national threat that poorly planned development poses to family farming and other traditional agricultural activities. Real quick, I do want to note there's a license plate on this opening slide because as our neighbors in Idaho, you guys probably see quite a few of these touring through your state, and that is Vital Grounds sponsored plate. So hopefully you see them on the cars, vehicles of good drivers only, and just know that every plate is supporting our work here in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska. So just wanted to make that connection because quite a few folks don't realize that's us. That's Vital Ground. If I could get the next slide, Karen. I just really quickly, I won't go through this map in detail, but I wanted to acknowledge and thank again the Nature Conservancy of Idaho, Conixu Land Trust, and several other conservation partners that are for years, for decades now, have worked to help stitch together kind of a tapestry of conserved lands in areas that show these specific climate resilience characteristics. The work, they have the working lands, they have the recreational values, but on this map there are any number of holdings that are state, federal, and tribal conservation holdings that private land trusts like TNC, Vital Ground, and Conixu have been working in partnership with many federal and state programs like the Forest Service's Forest Legacy Conservation Program, and now the ALE program that I'll be talking about today here northwest of Bonners Ferry up in Boundary County. So you know, there's a great tradition amongst the land trusts, and the initiative is really, I think, setting us up to amplify our efforts and help fill in all the pieces that are the white private lands on this map that that will complete the picture, you know, across valleys like this. If I could get the next slide, please, Karen. Vital Grounds work also brings a little bit different bend on science to the equation. Again, as an organization that focuses on the protection of key grizzly bear habitat to protect greater biodiversity, you know, we have done quite a bit of analysis over the past 4 years, specifically with more than 60 different wildlife biologists in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming to help us identify those areas that are absolutely critical for habitat protection, and then also important where investments in conflict prevention between grizzly bears and people need to be made. What we found through that process is that there's tremendous overlap with our conservation work on behalf of grizzly bears and climate resiliency, because as you all heard at the beginning of the presentation, Robin mentioned connectivity of landscapes is key to climate resiliency. So wildlife habitat connectivity is of utmost importance to wide-ranging, you know, species like grizzly bear and many other sensitive species, and the climate resiliency model just really is a mirror of what those wildlife species need for a future. Could I get the next slide, please? So our involvement in this project, again, with our background, really kicked off, was initiated due to the emphasis that biologists placed on the area for grizzly bear habitat, specifically just north of Bonners Ferry here. The valley shows great potential for connecting 2 of the federally designated grizzly bear recovery zones. That's the Selkirk Mountains Grizzly Bear Recovery Zone on the west side of the valley, with the Cabinet Yaak Purcell Range on the east side of the valley. It's in an area where there have been multiple grizzly bear observations documented crossing the valley between 2007 and 2020. So it initially attracted our interest for that reason. Next slide, please. But as our due diligence progressed, we really did find out that there were so many other values that we should be keying in on along with the wildlife habitat values. We had large agricultural holdings, not just on this project, but on surrounding acreages. The project that we're talking about today, the Kootenai Valley Linkage Project, is just over 1,000 acres. It has about 8,000 feet of Kootenai River frontage and all the associated wetlands that go along with that. That brings in some T&E species, threatened and endangered species, fish species in the river. And it just hosts a number of other benefits that support the initiative. All of that combined to support enrollment of this particular project in the Natural Resource Conservation Services ALE program, that's Agricultural Land Easement Program. On the next slide, some of the things that fed into that, it's very what they call prime soils based. They want to see very, very productive lands. They categorize much of their conservation effort into, or their focus into different categories of soils, with the most productive soils on working lands being the highest priority. And in 2019, the NRCS did designate this portion of the Kootenai Valley as a priority for conservation due to its soils. The purpose of the program overarchingly is to provide protection for the long-term viability of the nation's food supply, basically by preventing the conversion of agricultural lands to non-agricultural uses. So the nature of this project is really at its end going to be a bargain sale conservation easement where Vital Ground will long-term hold and monitor that project to make sure that it's adhered to into the future, and that those wild lands or those working lands are not converted to non-agricultural purposes. So hopefully it runs as smoothly, but we have a quick video on the project that hopefully will take you out to the field here, and I'll be quiet and let you enjoy the sounds while that plays, so you can see the vitality of the lands. Great.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you for that great video. Again, beautiful landscapes, very important to this initiative. So we would like to now open it up for questions, and I know it may take a little bit of time to see them come up in the chat, but again, if you scroll on your screen, you should be able to find the bubble that says chat, and you can type your question in there, and we will read them out loud. You can also try and unmute yourself to interrupt if you can. I can't see everybody on the screen, so I'm not sure you can get my attention otherwise. But while we're waiting, I would also invite either Will or Wendy to add any comments about the initiative. Will Whalen's the Executive Director of the Idaho Coalition of Land Trusts, and Wendy Ninteman from the Land Trust Alliance, who have also been helping to lead this effort across the region.
Will, you want to go for it?
I see Will's mouth moving, but he's on mute still. There you go.
How's that? Thank you. I got to be double unmuted. Hi, this is Will Whelan with iColt, and Karen, thank you for that opportunity. You know, what strikes me as I travel around visiting the members of the Idaho Coalition of Land Trusts is how quickly our state is changing. It's changing because of development, but it's also changing because of really thoughtful folks like Robin and Katie and Ryan are going to make Idaho so much more prepared for a future that can include wildlife in these huge landscapes that in 20 or 30 years, frankly, are going to look different than they do today. So I'm thankful for the contributions they're making to conservation.
Yes, and this is Wendy Nintman, the Western Division Director for the Land Trust Alliance, and I would echo that. And I think just looking at these two presentations gives you also a great sense of the diversity inside our community, which is so great. With Kinixu and the evolution of community conservation in Pine Street Woods, and then with the incredible habitat work, Ryan, and Vital Grounds. So this is really fun for me to listen to both of you and hear your stories about your projects, and to work with Will and all the other land trusts in Idaho on this project and the Community Foundation. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy and Will. There's a couple of questions that I will, you can all see them, but I can read them. I'll answer the second one first, which is how do land trusts get funding through this initiative, and how proposals get evaluated. I will kick it off, and I might ask for support again from Will or Wendy on some of the details of this. But really, this initiative, as has been stated previously, is a collaboration of 3 community foundations, the Land Trust Alliance and the Nature Conservancy, all to contribute their expertise toward conserving these climate resilient lands. So the Nature Conservancy and the Land Trust Alliance have really come up with the criteria for the land conservation grants and the capacity building grants, and there is an advisory committee that oversees the process. So any of that information is readily available, and I will pass that over in one second to Wendy or Will if they want to add to that. But the important thing that I would like to talk about is the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation has been funding this work now. They're in their second round of 3-year funding. And they came to the community foundations a couple of years ago and said, we'd love to partner with you if you think that you have people in your communities who would like to support this type of work that may not be aware of it. So they wanted us to help them expand their reach. And that has been our role. So we have funds that have been contributed, just over $5 million from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation for the grants, but with matching grants from all of our donors at the community foundations, we're going to be able to conserve more land and give larger grants to all of the land trusts. And that's really the important piece of the effort. So there are 2 pools of funding. One is to support land conservation, and one is for those capacity building grants. And I would say again, that in Idaho, those capacity building grants are really important to help our local land trusts be competitive in the grant program with the other states. So Will or Wendy, do you want to add any additional detail? I would ask Owen, but he's on vacation.
Well, yeah, I would just say Robin too, because Robin is actually on the Land Protection Committee that makes the grant recommendations. So it's a very extensive process. You know, TNC, because TNC was delivering this program, TNC's been absolutely essential in helping us design a process. And Robin, do you want to add anything about the land capital process?
Just that we have, you know, a set of ranking criteria that we're come together with partners. The people on the committee are kind of from all over different organizations representing a diversity of both the community foundations, land trusts, and just conservation professionals, scientists, practitioners, kind of all around all 3 states, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So.
And the only other piece I'd add to that is when the Nature Conservancy was running this program, and Robin, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I don't think we saw as many applicants from the community-based land trusts. And so that's something that was a big goal of ours through this project, was to get more land trusts at the point where they could actually apply for and deliver on these projects. So we're really pleased after the first grant to see the land trusts in Idaho and Washington and Oregon that applied for funding for the program and got funding, because you'll see a range of organizations. So, and then on the capacity building side, which is where I spend most of my time, Robin said it, you know, resilient landscape need resilient organizations. And so we work really hard, you know, land deals are forever. And so we need those organizations that are doing them to be highly professional, accredited, sustainable organizations. And so we spend a lot of our time doing that. And as we hopefully raise money to put into that capacity building side of things, we can deliver more robustly with that type of funding. Will, do you have anything to add?
Nope, I think you hit it just right.
Okay.
That's wonderful. And the only, I'll just wrap it up by saying that the committee has identified, as I said earlier in the introduction, a portfolio of projects. So they've said that these projects are all worthy of investment. We've done the first round of grants to a smaller subset of those projects, and we're really reliant on the additional matching funds to be able to fund all of the projects. So that's what we're talking about with all of our donors, with Seattle Foundation and Oregon Foundation are really saying, if this is something you're interested in, here's how you can help. And it's that collective support that makes it really impactful and effective. So I have a couple of other questions. They're slightly related, so I'm going to ask both of them and jump in, whoever wants to answer or start to answer. So if you're a landowner and can no longer keep, maintain, afford your rural property and need to sell, how can this land conservation group stop you from selling? So I'm making an assumption that the selling would then be for another use. So you might want to talk just a little bit about the transaction. And then the other question, somewhat related, is how much do local governments, particularly the county commissioners, support your land trust and your conservation efforts? So I think those go a little bit hand in hand because public, private, and philanthropic partnerships are really important to making this all work.
Well, Karen, I'll jump in real quick. I would just start by laying the groundwork that, you know, Idaho's land trusts have a very long history of collaborating with private landowners to try to make sure that working lands stay in working hands. Basically, you know, we are working hand in hand with private, especially in the case of the Hubbard Farm, which we're working on this project, with a large family farming operation to make sure that they can persevere for as long as they'd like to and have access to the resources and have a mechanism that is more attractive than selling for development, let's say. So from the start, you know, we share a common goal, and it's not to stop, you know, later transactions. We're not trying to prevent downstream sales of those properties. We want to make sure that they do stay available for agriculture, for wildlife, for public recreation, to provide other environmental benefits. So I hope that's speaking to the call of the question, but essentially the way that works is that we work very hard to match landowners up with public funding mechanisms, tax deductibility benefits to an AGI deduction at the end of the road for federal income tax purposes. And a lot of times, once the project's complete, we're also there assisting landowners to tap into resources to manage the land long-term, whether those are things like EQIP grants and other resources, but helping families find funding to continue on down the road. So in terms of how much interaction we have with local governments, that definitely varies from project to project, but for most projects, anytime public funding is involved, there is quite significant coordination between local, state, and federal entities that review. In Montana, we're required to coordinate with our counties on each conservation easement. In Idaho, these large public projects are vetted through local groups that involve county commissioners. In Boundary County, a great example is the Kootenai Valley Resources Initiative, where you know, they do offer a forum for presentations, questions and answers, and things like that. So we definitely proactively try to address commissioners' concerns in all of our projects.
Karen, I'd be happy to jump in a little bit too here.
Jim, we can't quite hear you.
All right, is that better?
Yep.
Okay. first of all, I want to just mention that I want to support Wendy's comments about capacity building. I don't think the Conixu Land Trust would be where it is today, and I don't think that Pine Street Woods would have happened had we not had a series of capacity building grants from LTA over the last 10 years. While none of those were spectacularly big grants, it's the regularity with which they happened and the amount of planning they allowed us to do to think into the future. That really created the groundwork for us to get to where we are today. And that just can't be emphasized enough, that if you don't create that space to do that kind of thinking, you can't do these kinds of projects. You can't do that. And so that's been integral to our success as an organization, and being able to think in terms of collaborating and building partnerships, which is really, I think, key to this work. We have, or as everybody knows, we're in a conservative state, and we happen to have a very conservative group of county commissioners. So I have a slightly humorous story about our county commissioners. People might remember the Clagstone Meadows project a couple of years ago, the TPL project. While we weren't involved with that directly, we wanted to support that. And we're careful to never be cast into an advocacy role. We are not an advocacy focused organization, but we wanted to support that. So since I knew all three of the county commissioners at that time, I did call to speak with each of them, and actually came in and met with two personally. And one of them, when I was expressing our support for the project and asked if he had any questions, he said, well, Jim, I've known you a long time, and while I appreciate you, supporting this organization, it's clear that you have all this outside money helping you. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, clearly you're getting money from George Soros, and your goal is to move people, from the country into the cities, so that, and then he just launched, clearly our county commissioners are not in a position to be supporters of the work that we do. So we, unfortunately, when you have that lack of common ground, where you have people, who, actually do believe in those conspiracy theories, it's really hard to start. Where do you find that common ground? And they're serious about it. I said, this particular commissioner who I've known for ages, I said, how can you believe that? Our financials are public. And he said, I'm sure you run two sets of books, like as if we're a truck driver. So anyhow, just as a bit of humor around it, we try to manage that. But there are times where, in a place like this, it's a little hard with that. We try so hard to develop, and certainly half of the easements we have are with people who are across the political spectrum, and that's really important to be able to reach out and meet people where they are. But we've really not had much success with our county commissioners are just not interested in our projects, at least haven't been. So that's maybe not a typical answer, but.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jim. And if you didn't see in the chat, Jim is on the board for the Conixu Land Trust and has been for 10 years. So sounds like you've heard and seen a lot. I don't know if Will or Wendy, Robin wants to add anything else to those comments.
Sure, I'll jump in.
I would just
there are 44 different counties in Idaho.
Go ahead, Will.
Okay, so there are 44 different counties in Idaho. They each have an elected set of commissioners. The key thing is to get to know them, right? So when Jim comes in, the county commissioner may have a set of concerns that you're not going to be successful with, but they know you and you know them. And so the relationships are critical. At the state level, I go to the Association of County Commissioners or Association of Counties meetings and get to know them and talk about it. And what we're finding is what works for counties in terms of doing these conservation projects is to put it in terms that make sense to them. So in Boundary County, the case is made that without these conservation projects, the wood supply for the local mills, the ones at Laclede and Moyer Springs, are going to dry up. If we have the Bonneville County in East Idaho, you talk about the recreational resource on the South Fork of the Snake, which has hundreds of thousands of people a year going down it and as an economic driver. In other places, some county commissions have become very aware that if you develop remote rural lands, that there's a cost to the county in terms of the tax impact. And they're becoming more tuned into the idea that developing rural working lands, particularly in remote areas, is a burden on their county taxpayers. So it's very different across the state, but the critical thing is these locally based land trusts, the ones that do work in these regions, have these relationships.
Great. Thank you, Will. Was that Robin or Wendy that was going to add something?
It was Wendy, and I was just going all the way back to the question about how can this project help if a landowner is in a position of selling. And just to echo again what you've already heard, we see, you know, for years and years and years, we talked to landowners about the benefits that Ryan talked about, the tax benefits of doing, making a charitable donation through a bargain sale or donated conservation easement, but there's not always, you know, funding available to do that. So what we see a lot is when we're able to offer some funding for those kinds of projects, that landowners who really do, where the afford piece is key and they really would like to stay, they can take that money that we invest in the project and use it to expand their operation. Maybe they need a little more land, maybe they need some equipment, but something to really keep their operation viable. And those are the deals that really make you feel good because they want to stay there. They want to keep their family on the family land. But a little bit of money can make all the difference. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Thank you. Another question about public education and related, I think, to your comments, Jem. Katie, in her video, talked a little bit about how important the public education was and the community conservation to the success at Conixu. Do you want to add anything to that about what you do to educate, inform the broader community about your work?
You bet. I would argue that 10 years ago, we were a very quiet organization and many people in our community could not have told you what the Conixu Land Trust was if they even had heard the name before. I think it's through the development of our community conservation programs, and particularly our education programs, that we've had a complete change with that, as Katie mentioned. I dropped my daughter, my 10-year-old, off at Camp Conixu this morning. She'll be there for a week. First thing she did was, this is her 4th year, took her shoes off. She'll be barefoot all week, jumping around Pine Street Woods. That program alone, we know, has had a huge impact on bringing conservation easement projects to us. You know, parents, grandparents, neighbors of kids who have been in that program. So there's what we thought might be, you know, a correlation, we now know is causal with these programs. We've had, it's not just anecdotal, maybe. We have very direct linkages. People who were not connected to us at all before, through our public programming, are now connected to the land trusting meaningful ways. They're not just sending us a $25 donation each year. They're, you know, putting their property into an easement, or they're becoming significant donors. They're becoming engaged with us. We do lots of other, you know, programming throughout the year, whether it's birding. We've done a bio blitz every year. Lots of programming for adults. And this has really become meaningful, as Katie was expressing, to our community. We don't even separate them now. When Katie and I were leading the campaign to raise the $2.2 million for Pine Street Woods, we often led with the educational piece. Yes, the conservation value was at the core, but it was the educational piece that really grabbed many of our donors, because it was directed at the children in our community, principally the next generation. So that has, we don't separate, you know, our conservation work from our educational work, from our community advocacy. It's all one now. And while that was a little bit challenging for some board members at first, now that's a non-issue. When we started the Pine Street Woods campaign on the board, we had a pretty typical distribution, and Wendy will recall this. We had about a third of us who were extremely enthusiastic about the project, a third that thought it was nuts, and then a third that were in the middle. And then by the time we'd raised the money, that distribution looked a little bit different. And now I would say everybody's all in. And it's just fascinating how that happens over time. And it's not just that we raised money, it's the engagement and the value that's perceived around the project.
Thank you, Jim. That's great. I think that's true for most things. The 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule.
Yeah, it's pretty typical.
Well, I want to, it's just coming up to an hour now. So I want to, again, thank everyone for your participation today. Thank our speakers. I love how you gave me the perfect way to wrap this up, Jim, because one of the things that I really appreciate about ICF's participation in this initiative is that we are able to spread the message broadly out to our network. So we have a very diverse network of donors, nonprofit organizations, members across the state who may or may not have a lot of knowledge about what's happening with the land trusts in our state. But if we can help communicate the importance of building resilient lands and resilient communities like everybody's already mentioned, then we've done a great job with this work. And if we meet our goals to fund all of those projects, then we'll all be in a better place. So thank you all. If you have any additional questions, I encourage you to follow up with somebody here at the Community Foundation and we can get you in touch with the right people. So you can go to our website and look up Kara Walker, Chris Common, or Christy Scott if you're in North Idaho, Tina Murphy in Eastern Idaho, and any of them can help get you connected to the right folks. So thank you all. Enjoy. Hopefully it's a lovely day up where everyone is. It's pretty hot here in Boise, so I might complain a little bit. Take care.